Chapter 1. The biting question. Imagine this. A battlefield scorched by the sun, sand swirling in the air, swords clashing, arrows flying like rain. Two of history's most feared warriors face off. The Crusaders, knights from Europe, clad in heavy steel, riding massive war horses, full of religious fire. And on the other side, the Mamluks, hardened slave soldiers raised from childhood, masters of horse archery, born and bred in the harsh lands of the Middle East. Who would win in a head-to-head battle? Would the heavily armored knight overpower his enemy with brute force, or would the swift, cunning Mamluk outmaneuver him with skill and desert knowledge? This is not just a clash of swords, it is a clash of civilizations, tactics, and survival instincts. So let us dive into history and find out who truly reigned supreme in the unforgiving heat of the desert and the chaos of combat. Chapter 2. The setting, time, place, and warriors. Let us start with the timeline. We are talking about the 12th to 13th centuries, the height of the Crusades. European knights had crossed seas and continents to seize control of the Holy Land. They built mighty castles, fought under banners of faith, and believed themselves invincible. But they were fighting an enemy unlike any they defaced before, the Mamluks. Originally enslaved boys taken from Central Asia and the Caucasus, they were trained from boyhood to become elite soldiers. They didn't fight for land or gold. They fought to survive, to rise, and eventually, to rule. Now, imagine these two forces meeting in the scorching deserts of Egypt or Syria. No rolling green fields of France here, just endless sands, searing heat, and little shade. So how did each warrior cope? The Crusader was used to the cool forests of Europe. He wore chainmail, carried a heavy sword, and rode a large horse built for power, not endurance. In the desert, that armor became a prison, trapping heat, slowing him down. Meanwhile, the Mamluk thrived in this environment. Lightly armored, mounted on fast Arabian horses, he could ride for hours without tiring. He knew how to move silently through the dunes, strike quickly, and vanish before retaliation. In terms of desert survival, the advantage clearly goes to the Mamluks. But what about actual combat? Chapter 3. Tactics and weapons. Clash of styles. Here is where things get really interesting. The Crusaders relied on the shock charge, a wall of armored knights thundering across the battlefield, breaking enemy lines with sheer force. It worked well in Europe, but in open desert terrain, against mobile enemies, it often failed miserably. The Mamluks, however, were experts in mounted archery. They mastered the deadly combination of speed and precision, firing arrows while galloping at full speed, then turning back to shoot as they fled. This tactic, inherited from the Mongols and perfected over generations, wore down enemies until they broke. One of the most famous battles between them was the Battle of La Fourby in 1144, where Mamluk forces helped crush a Crusader army so badly that it sent shockwaves through Europe. Another crushing defeat came at the Battle of Ain Jalut in 1260, where Mamluks defeated the seemingly unstoppable Mongols, proving their superiority in both strategy and execution. And yet, the Crusaders weren't pushovers. When they held strong positions, behind walls or in fortresses, they could withstand even the fiercest attacks. Siege warfare was their strength. But in open field combat, especially in the desert, they were often outmatched. Chapter 4. Discipline, training, and leadership. Now let us talk about something deeper than weapons, discipline and training. A Crusader knight was often a nobleman, raised with privilege. His training began in youth, yes, but his loyalty was divided to his king, his lord, and his religion. Internal rivalries among Crusader leaders were common, and unity was hard to maintain. The Mamluks, on the other hand, were a professional military caste. Their entire lives were dedicated to war. They lived in barracks, trained constantly, and obeyed a strict hierarchy. There were no family ties, no distractions, only loyalty to their commander and their corps. This made them incredibly effective as a unit. They followed orders without hesitation, adapted quickly to changing conditions, and rarely panicked under pressure. Leadership also played a role. Some Crusader commanders were brilliant, like Richard the Lionheart, but others were arrogant, reckless, or driven more by faith than strategy. The Mamluks, led by men like Baybars and Kalawan, were tactical geniuses. Baybars, in particular, was known for his ruthless efficiency, ambushes, and psychological warfare. He even once offered peace to a Crusader fortress, only to massacre everyone inside after they opened the gates. Chapter 5. The final verdict: who would win? So, after all that, who wins in a duel between a Crusader and a Mamluk? If the battlefield is flat, open, and scorching hot, the Mamluk has the edge. His mobility, endurance, and mastery of hit-and-run tactics make him nearly impossible to catch. Arrows fly from every direction, and before the Crusader can react, he has already wounded or surrounded. In close combat, the Crusader might have the upper hand with his heavier blade and shield, if he can get close. But in the desert, that's unlikely. When we look at history, the Mamluks not only resisted the Crusaders for centuries but eventually drove them out completely. By the end of the 13th century, the last Crusader stronghold, Acre, fell to the Mamluks in 1291, marking the end of the Crusader presence in the Holy Land. So here is the verdict: in the desert, Mamluks dominate. In open battle, Mamluks outmaneuver. In endurance and discipline, Mamluks prevail. The Crusaders were formidable warriors, no doubt. But in the brutal conditions of the Middle Eastern campaign, the Mamluks were simply better suited, physically, tactically, and mentally. They didn't just survive in the desert, they ruled it. Chapter 6. The psychological edge: faith, fear, and legacy. Now let us dive deeper, beyond swords and armor, into the mindset of these warriors. The Crusaders fought with a powerful motivation: religion. They believed that every battle was for God, and dying in combat meant guaranteed entry into heaven. That gave them courage, but also, at times, reckless bravery. Some charged headlong into death without hesitation, believing divine intervention would save them. But the Mamluks had their own brand of faith, not just religious devotion, but an unshakable belief in survival and dominance. These were men who had been taken from their homes as boys, trained to be soldiers, and taught that only strength and skill could keep them alive. Their loyalty wasn't to land or family. It was to their brotherhood, their military unit, and their commander. They didn't fight for salvation. They fought to rule. And when you combine that mindset with superior discipline and battlefield experience, you get a warrior class that doesn't break easily, even under extreme pressure. Fear was another factor. When word spread across the Holy Land that Baybars was on the march, many Crusader garrisons surrendered before a single arrow flew. The Mamluks knew how to use terror as a weapon, burning villages, destroying fortresses, and making examples out of those who resisted. In contrast, while the Crusaders could be brutal, their victories were often short-lived. Once their forces moved on, local populations rebelled. The Mamluks, however, built a lasting empire, one that survived the Mongols, the Crusaders, and internal strife for centuries. Chapter 7. Logistics and survival: who could last longer? Let us talk about something rarely shown in movies but crucial in real war: logistics. Crusader armies relied heavily on supply lines stretching all the way from Europe. Food, weapons, reinforcements, everything had to be shipped across dangerous seas and hostile lands. If those lines were cut, starvation followed quickly. Mamluk armies, on the other hand, operated deep within their own territory. They understood the terrain, controlled the wells and oases, and could live off the land. They carried less gear, ate simpler food, and marched longer distances without breaking camp. In the desert, water is more valuable than gold, and the Mamluks knew exactly where to find it. They used light carts and fast-moving supply units, avoiding the cumbersome wagons and heavy siege engines that slowed down European armies. If a battle stretched into weeks, like many did during sieges, the Crusaders began to weaken. Disease spread in their camps, horses died from overwork, and morale dropped. The Mamluks, they thrived, trained to endure hardship. They could wait patiently, strike suddenly, and disappear before the enemy could react. It was guerrilla warfare before the term even existed. So yes, in a long campaign, especially in harsh conditions, the advantage goes to the Mamluks again. Chapter 8, Siege Warfare, where the Crusaders shine now. This isn't all bad news for the Crusaders. There was one area where they truly excelled: siege warfare. The Crusaders built some of the most advanced fortresses of the medieval world. Castles like Crac des Chevaliers and Montfort were nearly impregnable. They had concentric walls, murder holes, and defensive towers that could hold off massive armies. When defending behind stone walls, the Crusader knight was in his element. He could rain arrows down on attackers, pour boiling oil over battlements, and withstand months of siege. The Mamluks, those skilled horsemen, struggled with direct assaults on such strongholds. They had to adapt, and they did. They learned to dig tunnels under walls, use trebuchets to bombard gates, and sometimes simply starve defenders out by cutting off supplies. Still, no Mamluk force ever matched the Crusaders' engineering genius when it came to fortifications. So if we were talking about holding a fortress or defending against an attack, the Crusaders take the lead. But remember, building castles is one thing. Holding them forever, that's another story. Chapter 9. The endgame: why the Mamluks won in the end. Despite their architectural brilliance and moments of victory, the Crusaders were always foreigners in the Holy Land. They never fully integrated with the local population. They were outnumbered, isolated, and eventually worn down. The Mamluks, on the other hand, ruled Egypt and Syria for generations. They weren't just fighting invaders, they were defending their home. That made all the difference. Their ability to absorb new tactics, adapt to changing enemies, and maintain a professional standing army allowed them to survive far longer than the Crusader states ever did. By the time Acre fell in 1291, there were no more Crusader kingdoms left. The dream of Christian rule in the Levant was over, and the ones who buried it: the Mamluks. Chapter 10. Final thoughts: Clash of Titans. So, to wrap up, was the Crusader knight stronger than the Mamluk warrior? In some ways, yes. In others, absolutely not. If you put them face to face in a European-style battlefield, the Crusader might win. Heavy armor, solid formation, disciplined charge, all things he was trained for. But drop them both in the desert under a burning sun, surrounded by dunes and distant archers, and the outcome changes completely. There, the Mamluk becomes the hunter. Silent, swift, unrelenting. He knows the land, he knows how to fight in it, and he knows how to make the enemy suffer. So here is the final score. Desert combat: Mamluks win. Open field tactics: Mamluks dominate. Siege defense: Crusaders prevail. Endurance and discipline: Mamluks rule. Long-term victory: Mamluks triumph. This wasn't just a clash of swords. It was a test of survival, adaptation, and willpower. And in the end, the sands of history belong to the Mamluks.